All right, I think we are live. If anybody is watching this, we have a Gitter chat room set up where you can actually tell me it's live right now. Hopefully, actually, I'm going to share my screen starting now. So hopefully, if you're watching this right now, thank you for joining us. If you can go to this gitter.im Bitovi/JS training, you can put comments. You can also use the questions app in that Google Hangouts provides, and we will answer your questions. Please feel free to post questions at any time and just stop me. I'll stop with, Alexis is going to be monitoring it. Alexis is with me. So I guess I'll do the intro and announce Alexis in a second. But Alexis is with me. He'll be monitoring the chat room, post questions, and we'll answer them. So let's get into it. Okay, welcome to the Bitovi JavaScript training. My name is Justin Meyer, and with me is Alexis Abril. You guys might have seen us at Frontend Masters, where for the first half of all this JavaScript training, we'll be kind of recreating that, but going a little bit slower and more in depth, obviously taking more questions, and we're doing it weekly to give time, which I think will help because it will give people time to absorb what we're talking about. So what is the goal? Why are we doing this? What do we want to accomplish, and what do I want you to accomplish? What do I want you to get out of it? The goal is quite simply, I want you to be able to look at a JavaScript application or a design. In this case here, I've just used Google Maps, and be like, yes, I can build that. I know I have the capability or the confidence or some mixture of both to know how to build that in a way that's maintainable, that it's going to be performant, and you can actually just accomplish a big task like that. So that's a really hard thing. I know because for those who have never heard of me or don't know me, my name is Justin Meyer. I'm the CEO of Bitovi. We are one of the earliest JavaScript consulting companies. I'll show this in the next slide. I've built, with me and my team, we've built over 30 different JavaScript applications. So we have a lot of experience building pretty big and complex things. And that's the kind of skill that I want you to have. So for the format, it's going to be depending on, today's is going to be the shortest lecture. Most of them will be about, between 30 and 45 minutes. Some of them will include exercises, and we will be posting the exercises ahead of time so that you can kind of get set up if you're following along, or we'll explain how to do the setup during the lecture. And then at the end of this, we will be asking people to ask any questions that you want. Even if there's anything complex, you have a question about how worker threads work, or anything related to front-end development, that's a great time to ask questions, and also a great time to give feedback. If there's something that you want us to talk about, please let us know. Our training schedule, like the topics that we want to talk about is flexible. So if there's enough people saying, hey, we really want to see this, we really want to learn this, we can either talk about it or move it earlier, those kind of things. And then we have a Gitter chat room, as I already pointed out, that has, if you go to gitter.im, Bitovi/JS training, you can put questions there, and Alexis is going to be monitoring that and stopping me because I can't actually see it right now while I'm giving the presentation. Okay, so with that, let's talk about just this slide. This lecture is just about the basics of JavaScript. The goal is to give developers an idea of how JavaScript operates in the browser. and give a little bit of insight to what we'll be talking about in future talks. So the goal is to do this basics of JavaScript today, and then we'll be talking about how primitives and objects work in the future, how functions and closures work, how this and prototypes, and that'll kind of conclude our JavaScript. And from there, we'll talk about jQuery and the DOM, and after that, we're going to talk about higher level things like architecture, dependency management, and so forth. So, despite the small syntax error, because Photoshop is terrible with always putting curly quotes everywhere. My first question to everybody, is this JavaScript? Is this statement right here, do you consider this JavaScript? Alexis, what do you think?
It looks like JavaScript.
It does look like JavaScript, and it's kind of a it's kind of a complicated answer, because it is JavaScript and it's also the DOM. And it's important, I think, for beginners to understand the difference between the DOM, which is the document object model, and which allows you to manipulate a page of HTML, and JavaScript, the language. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about, is how these things relate to each other and what these things are. So the browser, when you load a browser, it kind of has these different engines you could consider in it. It has a JavaScript engine which runs JavaScript. It has and it kind of has the DOM, which works with HTML. So JavaScript is a language, just like any other programming language. And we'll talk about the special features of the JavaScript programming language in a second. And HTML is just a simple document format. You could think of it as when you open up a Word document, somewhere on disk, there's some format that knows whether you've got a new paragraph, or you've got a big, bold piece of text. That's just a document format. It's not really live. It doesn't really do anything other than express content. And then finally, there's this layer, the DOM, which doesn't actually have a logo, which is unfortunate. So we created one that looks kind of stupid or or kind of wrong, because the DOM is a lot of times what people really complain about when they're first getting into JavaScript programming. But the DOM is intended to be a language neutral interface that allows you, any programming language, not just JavaScript, to manipulate an HTML document, to update its content structure, its styling, and even listen to events and do a lot of other behaviors. Now in practice, there's only one language that really matters for the DOM, and that's JavaScript. Theoretically, you could have a C# implementation of the DOM, and I think these things do exist, although I've never personally used one. I think there is a Java one, but the DOM is really is supposed to be an interface to manipulating HTML that is provided to JavaScript. Okay, so a little bit to kind of understand this breakup of how things work inside of a browser, I like to start with considering what happens if a user were to go to a page, a site that's going to return this as the HTML content. So what I mean is, think about what happens when if you were to put in helloworld.com/indexhtml and hit enter, and the server is going to return back this data. What's going to happen as detailed as possible? Alexis, what do you think is going to happen? And if you don't mind, Alexis, give the answer that most people typically give.
Sure, apologies. I'm actually looking up alternate DOM implementations for the Gitter chat. What was your question?
Oh, so what happens when you, I think I can keep it on me so it doesn't flash back and forth. Oh, then it came off. Hold on 1 second. I don't know if Lexus, if you can control the video of where it goes to, because you know how Hangouts does that thing where if you start talking, it'll go to you, and then when I talk, it'll go to me.
Yeah, I can't control that. I believe you can, though.
I can, but I can't. If I do it, then I lose whatever. Okay, we'll deal with it next. We'll try to figure out better.
All good.
What happens, I was asking, what happens when you go to this page and answer like how most people typically answer when we give this question?
It'll create the page with hello world, but you'll see an alert in front of it.
Yes, that is, you will see the alert hello world first, and then you will see the text hello world. But I want to go into much more detail, like talk about what actually the browser is doing behind the scenes. So when a person hits enter to go to that site, the browser is going to make an HTTP request to, well, it's actually going to do DNS lookup and all this other stuff that is just not worth getting into detail about. But in the end, a HTTP request is going to be made to a server. And the server is going to respond with an HTTP response. Now, that response can include a lot of other data, but the response body is going to include essentially a string of the HTML that the browser should show. And what the browser is going to do is pass this string over to its DOM engine. DOM is Document Object Model, again. And what the DOM is going to do is it's going to parse this, this string and read it and understand it as HTML. And as it reads the HTML element, it's going to build a document element. And as it reads head, it's going to append a head element and so forth until it gets to a script tag. Now, once a script tag of type JavaScript is encountered, or even if you don't have type JavaScript and just have script tag now, it just assumes JavaScript, that's going to pass it over to a JavaScript engine. Like in Chrome, that's going to be V8. And the DOM engine in Chrome, actually, it has a new one, right? Blink or something? Or is that coming? It used to be WebKit, but I always forget if Blink is now the new, right? That's the new name, right, Alexis?
Yes, Blink is the new engine.
Yeah, in Chrome it's Blink, in Safari it's WebKit. A throwback to one of my favorite elements of all time. So, anyways, once the script tag is found, then the DOM is going to pass control over to the JavaScript engine. And the JavaScript engine is going to parse the alert hello world. It's going to tokenize it first, and then parse it into some representation that it is able to run, right? It might go through multiple transformations, kind of to an abstract syntax tree, which is kind of what I'm showing here, and then it might get into, eventually all the way to like machine code, depending on the JavaScript implementation. Eventually, of course, it will run against the machine. And it gets it to some kind of representation that it can run, and then it finally is actually going to run the code. And when alert hello world is called, it's going to first look up alert. So it's going to have to find what alert means. And we're going to talk all about, in future presentations, how it looks up the value of alert. And then it's going to call the alert function with the string hello world. And then the alert function will obviously show an alert on the page and kind of freeze all execution, including any additional DOM processing, until the user clicks OK. Then the modal here, the hello world, is going to go away. And then the DOM is going to resume parsing the HTML of the page and adding that to the DOM. So in this case, it's going to see the end of the script tag, the end of the head, and then it's going to get to the body, and then it's going to create an H1, and an H1 element is going to show up in the browser. Right? So this slide hopefully gives you some idea of how, how the basic mechanics of the browser work, right? Where you're making requests, you get HTML back. HTML elements are kind of added to this document thing, which we'll talk a lot about. And then JavaScript, any JavaScript is found is kind of is made into a representation that's executable, then executed, and then this is why you always bottom load your scripts too. For those who might be wondering, is because you don't want any JavaScript to block showing hello world right away. So let's talk about a little bit about the characteristics of JavaScript, and then we're going to go into each of these in a lot more detail in future talks. So JavaScript is a dynamic, weakly typed, prototype-based language with first-class functions. What does that mean? Well, first, let's talk about what JavaScript, we'll talk about that in the next slides, a high level. But let's talk about what JavaScript is and isn't. So JavaScript is not Java. I think everybody realizes that these days. It is a real programming language. You might have heard of the term ECMAScript or JScript. JavaScript is a trademarked name for a programming language owned by Mozilla, who were kind of the first creators of JavaScript. But then they got that language in a spec. So that's the ECMAScript specification that kind of specifies how implementations of JavaScript should behave. So you could think of it like this is what defines JavaScript, and JavaScript is is Mozilla's implementation of JavaScript, but everybody just calls it JavaScript anyways. And JScript is or was Microsoft's version of, I don't know if they still call it, they probably still call it JScript, is Microsoft's implementation of the ECMAScript standard. And again, JavaScript is not the document object model, right? Being able to talk to HTML elements, listen to events, that kind of thing is not the same thing as JavaScript. That's just an implementation of the DOM spec in JavaScript. Okay, so let's talk about what these things mean: dynamic, weakly typed, prototype-based with first-class functions. Because this is like, if you've learned another language, understanding this about JavaScript these are the most important characteristics of JavaScript. If you've never learned another language, then that's cool. That's actually can sometimes be helpful because you won't have the baggage of understanding how other things work. So a dynamic language means compilation and execution happen together. So the way that I think about this is first to think about how a compiled language like C or Java works, right? In C or Java, you write your program and it gets compiled into bytecode or machine code. So you can think of that as, if you do an add, if you say like, I want to add two numbers, it writes stuff that actually either like the runtime or the actual machine understands. It'll write like the ones and zeros out that tell a processor to load two things in memory, then set up the processor then to add those two things to memory, and then save that result back in memory. Right? There'll be like three consecutive places, bytes in memory, or on disk until, it'll actually write out your program to disk. There'll be three consecutive bytes in that file that, read these numbers, then then set the instructions to add two numbers, and then in the instructions to save that number. What happens with the compile language is you load that code into your memory of the computer, and then it just starts running those steps. Dynamic languages are very different. You're building your application at the same time you're running your application. So compilation and execution happen together. What that means is you kind of, in JavaScript, you'll code your code, which is a little bit weird to think about. But here's a very brief example. So this kind of code happens all the time in libraries like jQuery and CanJS everywhere, where you want to make something in as few lines as possible. So you'll loop through some kind of object and then create a bunch of functions based upon that object. In this case, if we wanted to create jQuery's val function, a dumb version of jQuery's val function, and a dumb version of jQuery's HTML function, I could loop through this object and create a new function every time called val and then an HTML one, and basically return a function that will read this dot either value or inner HTML. Right? So I'm actually have code that builds the code for my library or builds the code that someone else is going to use. This type of stuff you can do in like C++ and other language that are not dynamic, but it is very obnoxious to do, right? You're dealing with functors and it's very tricky and not nearly as elegant as it is in JavaScript. So just to recap, compilation and execution happening together, that means that you know, if you actually looked at it in memory, into JavaScript, there's no difference between like your application's memory and and the actual like memory of whatever the application's working on, right? So if it's loading users and data and stuff like that and manipulating it, to JavaScript, it's all just one big pile of memory, which is kind of cool. So the next big feature of JavaScript is that it is weakly typed. Again, it's best to compare JavaScript compared to like a language like Java or C++, where in Java and C++, when you declare an integer, that really just takes up one unit of memory, right? Because it knows it's an integer. The compiler makes sure that all kind of manipulations of that data are, you know, safe against integers. So it only needs one kind of memory address to store a variable's value. That's different in a dynamic language where type is associated with the value, not a variable. So in JavaScript, when you declare var a equals 1, a is going to be a pointer to a memory address, a memory space that has a kind of, and we'll talk a lot more about this in future lectures, but the number 1 actually is not just like the number 1 in memory, it's kind of two parts. There's a identifier that says this is a number in memory, and then right after that, there's the actual value. So everything that you create in JavaScript kind of has it, every value that you have kind of has a hidden, hey, I'm a number in memory, followed by the actual value of that in memory. So we're going to see in a lot more detail what that means.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
I got one question coming from a colleague.
Mm-hmm.
Could you put your HipChat status on busy? We're getting all of those HipChat alerts through the feed.
Oh, let me just kill.
Sorry. Non-programming related question.
I thought I killed it. Oh, I opened it up. I remember. Yeah. I had killed it, but then I was like, oh, I got to send you the link. And then I forgot to close it after. My bad. Okay. Okay, so next one. JavaScript has first-class functions. This is probably the best part of JavaScript, is how easy it is to create functions, how lightweight they are. It makes functional programming just ridiculously easy to accomplish. With JavaScript, real simply, you can do anything with a function. Anything that you can do with an object, you can do with a function, right? You can create a function. You can return a function from within another function. You can pass functions, and you can pass functions as arguments as well. Right? So this is just kind of a contrived example showing that you can do, functions are just normal pieces of data that you can pass around. And if you start to understand that flexibility and power, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with the language. So finally, JavaScript is inheritance scheme is prototype based. And we're going to talk all about what this means in the future, like how to set up how the dot operator works in JavaScript, how new works, how prototypes and proto properties and all of that works. I'm not going to go into detail for here. So this is the first one. I hopefully people watching enjoy it. Mostly this, I think, was just a taste of what's to come, but I kind of wanted to, set the foundation for some things. In summary, JavaScript is a the DOM is a JavaScript representation of HTML in the browser. So that's an important thing to understand when you're starting to do JavaScript. And then JavaScript is a dynamic weakly typed prototype-based language with first-class functions and some data types. So if you're an absolute beginner, a lot of this stuff might not make any sense to you, but that's okay, because I think next week, we'll actually start to show code, and then we're going to go into detail on what all of this stuff means. So next week, we're going to talk about types, operators, and primitives. So we're going to show what does the equal sign actually do in JavaScript, right? What does the dot operator do? How does data get created in memory? And that kind of thing. And I should say one other point about these trainings in general is we try to target the information that you can't easily get on your own. So if you're coming to this and, I guess I should say, we're not going to be like, hey, this is how you define a function and showing the syntax of a function and stuff like that. I feel like people can look that up easily enough on their own and learn that. Our training is designed to kind of give you the things and the ideas and the concepts that are not easy to come by yourself, and to be able to have an open forum to talk about those things so that we can get to that the kind of difficult to grasp understanding of JavaScript and how to build applications. So questions you can ask here. I don't know if there are any questions, but I have two questions that I'd like people, if they can, just jot down. What is your experience level? If you've written a bunch of apps, just say like, oh, I've written a few apps in JavaScript. I've been, for a few years. If you don't mind sharing that information in Gitter, that would be really great for us. Or maybe just say, this was way over my head. You guys need to make it easier or make it harder, or whatever you feel like. Any feedback that you can give really helps us. And then what do you want to learn? So if there's something that you're having trouble with grasping, please let us know, and that'll heavily influence how we take the training going forward. Because again, this is, as much as there's kind of a schedule set, I really view this more as what I want to do is kind of get a community of like-minded learners together, and our trainings will get better because we'll have feedback from you guys, and that feedback will hopefully, help us make you better at JavaScript. So anything you can write in Gitter is great. And if you want to privately give us feedback, you can email me at justin@bitovi.com or alexis@bitovi.com. So that's it for right now. And now is just the open questions. So if people have any open questions that they want to chat about, Alexis and I are here to answer them. It can be on anything. So we got any takers? So how things work behind the hoods. Yeah, I think that's actually what we're going to talk about a lot, Bruno. We're going to go into how JavaScript wires things up in memory. So I think that's actually a lot of what we focus on here. So that's perfect. So I'd like to be able to learn enough about JavaScript to write functions instead of just bug hunting and maybe try out things like nodes. So some of this stuff I'll just we can talk about now, and then we'll revisit later. So struggle with CMS and Angular. I'd like to be able to learn enough about JavaScript to write functions from scratch. So yeah, you should be able, when we get into functions and how closures work, nice individual. I like your name. It feels pleasant to talk to you. When we get to, we'll talk about functions and how they work, but if you're an absolute beginner, we can have some suggestions next time on some kind of practice exercises and demos that I've seen from other websites that can be helpful if you just need the basics of how to write a function. But what we'll actually get into is really how functions work in memory. We do kind of take a very kind of computer science-y approach to all of this. Advantages of JavaScript over jQuery. Tribet84, jQuery is written in JavaScript. So when you're writing jQuery, you're actually writing JavaScript, but jQuery provides a lot of useful like APIs. So jQuery lets you load elements easier and do certain transformations than the actual DOM provides. If you're talking about learning jQuery versus learning JavaScript, I would try to learn both. jQuery is really great if you're just trying to get some basic functionality work. It's much easier to use than JavaScript. But I think it's very important if you want to get to the point where you can build almost anything you want in a JavaScript application, you have to understand JavaScript, the language, because you need to understand what jQuery is doing. And I should mention that a big part of our training is we're going to build our own versions of jQuery. So hopefully you can kill two birds with one stone for most people, is you'll learn jQuery and learn JavaScript at the same time. Okay, yeah, so Sunny Booth Web Design, we're gonna talk all about, we're gonna build our own version of jQuery eventually, and you'll learn about how to manipulate things in the DOM yourself. What are my thoughts on Learn Modern Developer? I've not been there, so I don't want to rush to judgment. Learn to any judgment, so I guess I won't. I don't want to. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all of these sites that there's so many sites lately that talk about how to learn JavaScript and stuff like that. I don't have an opinion on any of them. I guess I have a high opinion of myself on what I think is important to learn, and I think we do a good job of teaching people that. If other places are getting in depth in the same way and kind of teaching similar to us, then I probably am a big fan of them. Although again, we don't give practical stuff. We give what I think is the intellectual underpinnings you need to know to be able to build stuff, right? You can spend your whole life, building like little tiny, just using jQuery to string things together. But if you don't understand JavaScript and how it works, you're never going to be able to build anything like cool or amazing, I think. So that's why I try to teach people that stuff. So yeah, look at that. Async execution, why we have the promise pattern. Yeah, the promises would be a good one to include. I think that's a really good idea.
I think so. We get a lot of questions about just what callbacks are in general. You get used to them in the jQuery syntax, but when you're building your own APIs, it's kind of hard to piece that together in your head, why we even pass functions around as arguments. So we could touch on that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, you can think of it as whenever you're doing something like with jQuery, if you wanted to, when someone clicks some button like, show more. For those who aren't familiar with jQuery, this gets an element on the page with ID show more. And if you don't know what I mean by that, this means that you have somewhere on your page an element that looks like this. what this is going to do is get that element, and then with jQuery, you're often passing a function to jQuery, and all this is doing, a function, what it really allows you to do is provide arbitrary behavior. You can think of it that way. A function, anything that kind of goes in here is some behavior that when this element is clicked on, this function kind of defines some behavior that will run. So I could, console log, hello world, and I could do anything else, any other code I'd want to write, I can put in here. That's why we pass functions so much, right? Is because it allows you to do arbitrary behavior and kind of encapsulate it, right? And I can reuse this function if I wanted. So I could say like do something as a variable, points to this function. So now you can think of it as do something represents some behavior. And in this case, it's console logging hello world. And then I can pass this function to different places. So this is something else. Now both show more and something else would call do something. All right, so that's the way I think of functions, is they kind of encapsulate some kind of behavior that you want to perform, some kind of action you want to perform. Sometimes struggle with helping moves behind the scenes. We're going to explicitly talk about triple equal and double equal. You will understand that extremely well. GB design, GB design, promises. So the spaghetti code stuff is going to come later once we get into the architectural stuff, but we'll definitely get into that. Talk about the observer pattern and stuff like that. We'll talk all about exactly how closures work. In terms of Node, Alexis VT. No, we're probably not going to talk about Node. Although I do think that at least this first section, which is all about JavaScript, will help your Node development for sure. Which ECMAScript? I'm going to stick to probably ECMAScript 5. Maybe most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is 4, and a lot of the techniques are just like the techniques that will work everywhere. That's a really good question. Yeah, I think we've been talking about, we might put some of these early slides up. We probably will put these JavaScript and the jQuery ones up. In the Bitovi, I'm gonna create a Bitovi /JS, Bitovi, not JS training, but a Bitovi training repo that we'll start putting these things to. I'll probably make a comment. We probably need like I'll probably add Twitter, Bitovi's Twitter or something, and let people know when it's there. Yeah, any language will help you understand JavaScript. Python is probably a really good one too, so it can't hurt. And the more programming languages you know tend to be the better. I guess I should say there's a sweet spot. If you know a ton of programming languages, then it's really helpful. If you know just one and it's like Java or C Sharp, then it can be a little bit more difficult. Yes, we are going to create apps by the end of this. I guess I just realized I'm eating carrots. People can probably hear that. Alexis already kind of answered some of these things. Yeah, we are going to build apps. There is a scheduled for the different MVC. There is a kind of scheduled biased MVC comparison. We are going to be talking a lot about Bitovi stack towards the end of the year. However, I should say that if you're using Angular or React or any of the popular frameworks, a lot of the stuff that we talk about is so high level, it really does apply to all of any framework that you're going to use. Okay, I think I got to I was thinking about homework. That would be at this point we don't have any prepared. I think the homework might be some of the like some of these lectures have actual you know, take home work a little bit, which you can either. So yes, there will be. My plan is to do the exercise, and I think what I'll do is say, okay, right now, if you want to work on this exercise, stop watching or something, or I'll have to figure out some way. Maybe I'll just break it up and say, you know, here's the answer, and then for those who want to work on it without watching, and then come back 10 minutes later, and then the you can come back for the question and answer section.
We might be able to break it up, especially at the start, the first few weeks of these lectures. I'm thinking through the exercises. We might be able to go straight through the lectures and just give the exercises at the end to anybody who would like to try them out on their own. And then the following week, we basically review the answers from the prior week's exercises before we kick everything off. There'll be a little bit of overlap,
Yeah.
but I don't think we explicitly give the answers to an exercise in the slides following that exercise.
Okay. So you could just do the answer in the following week, and we'll just have to end on the exercise probably.
Yeah, it'll be like a, you know, crossword of the week kind
and
of
that
thing.
works because I think we can be around for questions while people are trying to work on the exercises. Which I think
Exactly.
So will these be recorded for viewing later? Yes, they will be, or they are all automatically. So that's why we're using Google Plus Hangouts, because it'll be recorded. Yes.
Is this on the Bitovi channel or the CanJS channel? Bitovi channel?
So for splitting it up, you know, unfortunately, no. I mean, this is a problem we faced as trainers. Alexis and I have given tons of training that we faced. So sometimes we do split it up, but just because of time, you know, we don't have the time to do kind of two different tracks of training. It would just take too much. My hope is that this training hits a lot of a sweet spot. So if you're like, if you're an intermediate developer, this will be really helpful. Even if you're an advanced developer, I think it'll be helpful. If you're an absolute beginner, I think this will be helpful if you're doing your own kind of, you know, work on the side. Like you're, okay, well, I'm trying to learn JavaScript. I saw the lectures. I'm going to look through the video again, kind of see what they're talking about, maybe try some code examples that they worked on. If you're doing that kind of thing on the side, you should be able to kind of, and asking good questions, I think you should be able to keep up even if you're an absolute beginner. So yeah, unfortunately we can't split up, but I would say that if we do get to a point where like a lot of beginners are like, hey, if you're an absolute beginner and you're just like, hey, I don't get this at all, especially going forward in the future ones, let us know. And we can insert a few like, hey, absolute beginners, here's like a catch-up lecture. I'm just like, here's how you write a function. Here's kind of the general idea of, you know, these low-level, the kind of starter concepts. And we can do that so that people can kind of, you know, the advanced and intermediate people can skip that one, and then everybody can kind of join up again. Sure. So I guess I'll just put my Twitter handle. So all this stuff, oh, I wrote Justin, why did it go Justin Bieber? Stupid. So here's mine, and Alexis Grill. But all the stuff that will be talking about will be we'll tweet every kind of announcements and stuff like that from the Bitovi Twitter. And then I'll just put, it's not up yet, but this is going to be our training material. I guess I would say if you have any like really big substantial suggestions that you want to give to us, maybe create an issue in the training. You know, if you have a lot of feedback that you want to talk about, something that you can't just quick type on Gitter, that you want some discussion for, create that there, and we'll discuss it there. So where do I? Oh, bring myself back. All right. Well, you know, from Alexis and myself, thank you for joining us. Hopefully, this is the first lecture of our first kind of lesson in a long list of lessons that help people get to where they want to be with technology. I'd be really happy if at like a year from now, people are like, oh, look I got this job, or I built this app. So that's my goal, is to get a few happy testimonials like that. So, all right. I don't know if Alexis, you want to say your goodbye.
Thank you to the world.
All right. Well, until next Wednesday, take it easy, everybody. See you later.